Isabel Maria Avila Cabral.
Were you named after anyone?
I was named after my paternal grandmother.
And when were you born?
July 16th, 1957.
Where were you born?
I was born in Lages, Terceira.
When did your family immigrate to the United States?
My mother and my siblings and I immigrated in 1964. My dad had gone to the United States prior to us.
And how old were you?
I was 7 years old.
Why did your family leave the Azores?
My dad had originally come to the United States, actually with some of his brothers, and for the same reason probably most people come. They figured they could come over here, make some money, and then go back to the Azores and kind of get a head start on life. And then unfortunately there was some earthquakes that happened during that time. And as my father was here, the family was there, it became very difficult for our family. My dad was having a hard time being away from us. We were having a hard time being away from him. And so he decided that if he was going to be here, then we were all going to come. And then when we finished and had enough money, we would go back.
And did that ever happen?
No.
So when your mother and your siblings and you came over, do you remember, did you bring any possessions with you?
You know, I don't remember a lot of that. So if we did, it was just basic things. I do remember we had to wait in San Miguel for a while. So I know we did not have a lot of things. But to be honest, in those days, we didn't have a lot of things.
So your father was already here.
Mm-hmm.
I'm assuming you joined him where he was living. Where was he living and what was he doing?
He was actually living in Hilmar on Faith Home Road, which is where we came to and where we have lived. And actually my sister still lives there. So we have been there in that ranch for over 50 years.
So he was working on a ranch.
He was a milker.
Now, you were 7 years old. Do you remember what your first impressions were of this country?
Well, I remember the airplane ride. I remember, not being able to communicate. For some reason, I knew the word sugar, and I remember, but there was not much of an opportunity to use that word. And so I remember being busy, felt a little overwhelmed with things, but I was a kid, so it was also, I think, a new adventure, and so I don't remember being a traumatic experience.
Do you remember what some of the biggest adjustments were that you had to make?
Being away from family. We had lived there, we lived with my grandmother and my great aunt, and so coming here and being away from family, and of course we went to a dairy, so dairies are isolated. We didn't go to a town or we didn't go to a city. So going to a dairy, we were isolated. So I think that's the thing I noticed that was the most significant. Even as a child, I noticed that.
How about when you started school? Were there any language barriers, anything with other children? Like, boy, what are you saying?
When I started school, I went to a little country school. It was called Riverside School, and it had first and second grade. And I was very fortunate. There was a gal there that spoke Portuguese. And so she really was my interpreter. And so I probably had it easier than others because of that.
And was this a teacher or was this another little girl?
It was another little girl in my class. Mm-hmm.
So were there other Portuguese then who settled in this area that your family became friends with?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. At that time, there wasn't a lot. But eventually, more and more Portuguese settled in this area because of the agriculture and the opportunities there. And so, now Hilmar is well known as a Portuguese community.
So now, what was it like for your mom and your dad? You were young. How old were your siblings?
My brother was 2 years younger than I was, so he was 5. And then I had a younger sibling that when he left there, he was 2. And then my younger brother. And then actually, I have a younger sister who was born in the U.S.
Do you recall anything about your parents' experiences here? Was it difficult for them to adjust to life in the United States? How were they treated?
I think it was difficult, especially for my mom, because I think she was completely away from family, where we did have some of my dad's brothers here. So there was some, and he'd been here for a while, so he was already a little bit more used to it. I think for my mom, it was very difficult. The food was different, grocery stores were different. Everything was different. And even though there was some Portuguese connections, and we could grow cubes and those kinds of things. It was still difficult. And we didn't have a lot. So I can remember we would go to the thrift store. We would call it Loja de Segunda Mão, secondhand store. And I can remember in those days my mom buying, for example, a dress that had a big full skirt. And then she would take it all apart. She would use the fabric from that skirt then to make dresses for me. And so I could go to school because we didn't have a lot.
So at 7 years old, do you have enough memory of your life in the Azores to have missed anything from there other than like your family?
I think the thing I missed the most was my grandma and my great aunt. That I remember because they were part of our daily life. As far as other things, not really. Matter of fact, I think I got my first toothbrush when I was probably like 5 or 6 because I can remember the experience of having this toothbrush. So we didn't have a lot. I mean, we certainly had enough to get by and our life was fine and we were happy. But I don't remember missing. I do remember, actually, I take it back. I do remember missing some of my playmates and some of the girls that I played with in the neighborhood. But it was the people that I missed.
What traditions did your family maintain here when they came to the United States?
Wow. Okay. So we had, I think, a lot of the typical traditions that Portuguese have. We continued with our matança. So we had matanças and everybody would come over and we'd have that. We'd make linguiça and morcella and all that. Of course, our food remained the same. You know, my mom cooked as much as she could, like she had there. So I think we had still the experience of the traditional food. Matter of fact, I remember thinking we always had papas for breakfast. And when I first found out that Americans ate cold cereal for breakfast, I can actually remember that wow, why would they want to eat something cold in the morning like that? So that was, there was a little cultural things like that. But otherwise, we pretty much kept those traditions. We went to church every Sunday. We tried to get together with family and friends when we could. So I think a lot of those typical traditions, festas, the Festa do Espírito Santo, those kinds of things, I think we continued with.
Now, forgive me because I don't speak Portuguese, but you said matança. Can you explain what that is?
Sure. The matança is the butchering of the pig, of the hog. And so in the Azores, that's very common. Everyone, you raise the pig, and then that becomes your food then, that sustains you. So they continue that tradition here. And then out of that, you make, the linguiças and morcella. It also is a type of, not type of linguiça, but you use that. And so every part of the pig is used, basically. So that's how you provide food for the year.
So what new traditions did you adopt?
Well, like everyone else, I probably became acculturated as a kid. I do remember Halloween was an odd one for me. I remember at school kids did Halloween, and I really didn't participate in Halloween. And I began to join 4-H and those kinds of things. My parents were very supportive of that. And I can remember my trick-or-treating was trick-or-treating for UNICEF. And I can remember going home to home, collecting money that we would collect and then send to UNICEF. So that was my trick-or-treating experiences. I don't remember trick-or-treating as a kid ever. I don't think I dressed up as anything, nothing. Later on in high school, I can remember we'd have high school dances and that kind of stuff. So I did those kinds of things. So traditions that I took on, well, we adopted, I suppose, some of the Christmas things. We still kept our nativity, but we had a Christmas tree. So I think, we adopted some of those things. And then the other things, there's nothing that stands out that was unique or different. But, little by little, you become acculturated and learn more and more.
Now, did you grow up on a ranch then, Isabel?
I did. I actually grew up, the place that we immigrated to on Faith Home Road is the place that I lived then for, the rest of my life until I moved to college. So we lived there for most of my life. Hilmar has been a home to me.
Did your siblings and did you work do agriculture work growing up? Do you remember? Did you work on the farm?
Yeah, I do remember my brothers are very involved in, helping to milk and feed calves and, taking hay to the cattle and all that kind of thing. I did not do so much. My responsibility was basically around the house. So, I was expected to watch my siblings. I was expected to clean house and dust and those kinds of things. And every now and then I'd help outside. But basically my role was inside, and then my brother's role was outside.
And again, the longer that you lived here, the more Portuguese families moved over.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So now that you're older and have a family of your own, you have 3 children.
Correct.
Right? What Portuguese traditions and customs, if any, did you make an effort to preserve while you were raising them, and why?
Well, the nativity and the Christmas and all that. And for example, on the 6th of June, we would put out our shoes. I did that when I was a child in the Azores. We would put out our shoe by the nativity. So I've done that with my children. They put out their shoe, and Menino Jesus comes during the night and fills their shoe with wonderful things, always a book, and then some little trinkets and some fruit over there that if we got an orange, that was a big deal. So I typically will put some kind of fruit in their shoe and some candy and that kind of thing. So that we preserved. The making flage on the day before Lent begins, we would do that. That was something typical that we did.
And may I ask what that is?
Flage is a Portuguese doughy pastry that is deep fried and it's delicious. So we've done that. Gosh, what are some of them? Of course, we attended some festas and Bodelete, which is it's a parade kind of before the festas that take place. I've tried to make sure that we incorporate the Portuguese language into their world and the Portuguese culture. So when I was growing up, my mom and dad were very adamant that we were going to continue to speak Portuguese. So at home we spoke Portuguese, and every day after school, my mom would sit us down at the kitchen table and we had our Portuguese lessons. So she had brought books from the Azores, and so we actually had lessons in Portuguese. And so I wanted to make sure that happened with my kids. So I enrolled them in Portuguese language schools. Actually, that was, I think, part of the impetus for me to be involved in the Portuguese language and culture, because I wanted to make sure that happened for my children. So I was a founding member of the George Descendant Portuguese Language School in Turlock. Later on began actually a bilingual program, Portuguese bilingual program in Hilmar. So I always wanted to make sure my kids had that opportunity. We went back to the Azores. I think the first trip they took back, I think my son was 3 and my daughter was probably 2. So we tried to keep those connections to our home, because I wanted that to be important to them. I knew it would never be like it was. I knew it wouldn't be for them like it was for me, because it was in my soul. But I wanted it to be at least in their heart. So I think that was real important for me.
Why was it important to you?
I think it was important because it's who we are. And it's real important for me to have my children proud of who they are, to accept who they are. And even though I was in a community that had some Portuguese in it, there were some biases and some prejudices. And so, and that's okay, because that makes you who you are. You grow through that, you learn. But I wanted to make sure that my children were never ashamed to say that they were Portuguese. So I wanted them to be proud of that, and to just understand a little bit of where they came from, because I knew eventually it would matter to them. It may not matter to them when they were 5 or 7 or even 22, but I knew it would matter to them when they were 30 and older, as they wanted to know more and more. So I didn't want to regret that I hadn't done and hadn't provided some of these things for them.
When you talk about biases and prejudices, can you go into a little more detail?
Well, when I first immigrated to the U.S., Portuguese was still fairly new to this community. We were certainly not the first immigrants, but we were seen as the workers. And luckily, I think the Portuguese had a real good reputation. They had the reputation of being hard workers, of being religious, of being honest and fair. So I think all those things were good. But as a child, children are not always kind. And so they would say things that would be hurtful to me. Or sometimes, actually later on, I can remember specifically in 6th grade, people saying things that were unkind about other Portuguese immigrants that came. And I felt very protective that, in general, that kindness, even back then, just really hurt my heart. And I just felt this need to protect them and to try to help them out.
Are there any stories that have come down to you from your parents and even your grandparents, Isabel, that have shaped your sense of who you are and what's important?
That's a deep question. I don't know about stories. My family was very much, my parents and were very much about us being honest and fair and doing our very best and hardworking. So I think we held those traditional values. So I do remember a story that my mom told me. It was real important for our family that we mind our own business. We do what we're supposed to do. So I can remember my mom one time, actually I was in school, and I can remember my mom telling me this story, and it was basically a story about gossip and how, you shouldn't exaggerate and those kinds of things. So she tells me this story about how there was this, of course it always has to do with religion, so about how this young man came to confession and talked about how he had spread these rumors, and then it was too late to change it. He was trying to make it good, but he couldn't, and so the priest told him, well, for your penance, I want you to take a feather pillow. I want you to go to the highest point that you can. Cut open that feather pillow, shake that feather pillow till there's no feathers left. And then after all the feathers have settled, go back and pick up every single one of them. And so the young man said, well, that's impossible. I can't go back and pick up all those feathers. And he said, that's absolutely right. And that's what happens when you tell an untruth or when you spread rumors. And that story has stuck with me for the rest of my life. I've told my kids that story. I've told, of course, in the educational field, I have to change it a little bit, but, so those kinds of stories were the things I think that they shared with us. That one specifically sticks in my mind. But those kinds of stories that helped you to think about, what it was to have good character and to be honest and all that.
So tell me what it was like being a teenager growing up in Hilmar.
I think I was really blessed because Hilmar was a small town, so I think that helped. Because I'd been here since 1st grade, that helped. So I was already, I got to know the my classmates, so I began to blend in. So I think that was a positive. And there were other Portuguese immigrants that began to come in. So I think I did have a support. So I think I was really blessed to grow up in Hilmar. I'm really thankful that I had that opportunity.
Did you know that you were going to go into education from the time that you were young, or what happened? What were your dreams? Explain the trajectory that brought you to where you are right now.
Yeah. No, I don't. I think probably like every teenager, you begin to wonder, what are you going to do and how are you going to do it? But I definitely didn't say I'm going to be an educator or I'm going to be a teacher, let alone I'm going to be a superintendent. So I think it was just the experience that I had. So it began when I was in high school. I did things like I was a camp counselor, and then I was involved in 4-H, and so I helped others. I was involved in Girl Scouts. So I think it began as I enjoyed working with other people and helping people, and it translated eventually to working with children. So then I actually was a TA. I was able to help a teacher's assistant help at a high school. So I think those are the things, those experiences I began to realize that I had a talent in that area and that it was very fulfilling for me. I really enjoyed that. So then I volunteered more. I went to the Green Beret camp where I helped students with disabilities, did those kinds of things, and eventually became an instructional aide. So I was an instructional aide actually at Turlock School District, at a Head Start program, at a special education school in Modesto. So just had instructional aide experiences as I was going to school. So I actually went into school as an undeclared. I was an undeclared student. Began to have those experiences as an instructional aide and then realized I really like this. And so then decided to pursue the teaching career. I did have to work part-time because my parents didn't have the ability to put me through school completely. And so they paid for my gas, provided a car, and then I did tuition and all that. So I did work part-time. Took me a little bit longer to get through school than some of my friends. So I went part-time for 2 years. I was a full-time student, part-time worker. Then I took 2 years off school and just worked full-time. And I worked at a Head Start program, preschool, and then I also worked at a school for children and adults with disabilities. And then after that, went back to school full-time and continued working as an instructional aide part-time, and then became a teacher.
So what school did you go to? Where did you get your degree?
I went to Stanislaus State here in Turlock. Mm-hmm.
Excellent. And so tell me what it is, because we were speaking in the kitchen about how teaching is a calling. Mm-hmm. Would you say that it's a calling? Was it a calling
absolutely.
For you?
Yeah, absolutely, no doubt. And I think it almost needs to be a calling, because I think teaching is not easy. Education is not easy. So I think it really needs to be the place where your heart and soul are in order for it to be fulfilling and for you to really make a difference and an impact in students. It has to be something that's really deep. So yeah, I do believe it's my calling. I believe it's my vocation. And I just feel real blessed that I found that, because I think there's many people that don't find that in life. So yeah, I feel very blessed that I did.
So you're now the superintendent of Hillmar Unified School District.
Correct.
When did you assume that role?
In 2007, so I think going on my 12th year.
So tell me what that experience has been like. I mean, teaching has been your calling, your heart, your soul has been in it, and now you're an administrator. So tell me how that changes things for you in terms of how you're able to contribute to the lives of teachers and students.
Yeah. Well, I think every teacher goes in wanting to help students and help kids. And that was really the same thing I did. And then my administrator, actually, I'm going to pull back a little bit. When I student taught, I did a student teaching assignment in Livingston, and I did another student, which is a nearby town, and I did another student teaching assignment in Hillmar. And so I was really blessed to have job offers at both school sites. And I can remember coming home and talking to my dad and saying, oh my gosh, I don't know, they're both nice schools, they're both great. And I can remember that time, and this really influenced my life. My dad telling me, we are really blessed. Hillmar has been good to us. He goes, it's time for us to give back. And so I decided, yep, I'm gonna work for Hillmar. And so I did. I began working for Hillmar as a teacher. And then in teaching, I had a principal who came to me and said, hey, there's this program that we applied for. It's a federal program. We'd like you to help coordinate it. And it was actually a program to help Portuguese students. So it was actually for Portuguese and Spanish-speaking students. And so, of course, my normal response was, oh my gosh, I'm still new. I think I'd been in the classroom maybe 3 or 4 years. I'm probably not the person. I'm happy to help, but I don't know that I should be the one doing this. And he really encouraged me to take the leap, and I did. So I began working through, back then it was called the Title VII Development Program. So I had the opportunity to work with parents. My focus was Portuguese. So I had the first, actually even before I was out of the classroom, I had the first Portuguese bilingual classroom. Back then, I think, gosh, that was probably 1984 or something like that. And so I had the Portuguese bilingual classroom for a while, then left the classroom and ran the program, basically, was a program director for it. And so I had the opportunity to work with lots of Portuguese families and Portuguese children coming in, and we had a large number at that point. I would have meetings with 200 parents in the cafeteria. So then it was awesome, and I felt the opportunity to help them get a hold of this culture and really make the most of it and know how to balance. You can keep your culture and add a different culture to it. So helping them navigate through that, I think, was real rewarding for me. So I think that's when I found that, wow, working with children is rewarding, but working with adults is rewarding too. And then in that job, I also had the responsibility of working with instructional aides. I had several instructional aides that I worked with. I did various workshops for teachers and that kind of thing. So that I slowly moved into administration, because that really was not an administrative role, but it was out of the classroom. So then from there, then I actually became assistant principal at one of the elementary schools, and then became principal at one school, then later on became principal at another school, then became curriculum director, and eventually became superintendent. And honestly, that was never my goal. I liked all my jobs, but I really never aspired to be a superintendent. But circumstances happened, and it looked like that's kind of where I needed to go. And so I have been doing that for 12 years. So I do feel like I have an influence. I think at the beginning of my career, I really thought that could only happen through working with children. Now I know that your efforts can really be multiplied if you can make a difference with adults, because they in turn will make a difference with students. So yeah, I do like what I do. It's definitely different than being a teacher in a classroom, but yet it's also very similar.
Now, you were principal at the school that you attended as a little girl, weren't you?
Correct. Yes, and that was actually when I was hired, some of the teachers who had been my teachers were actually there, and I could not call them by their first names. So it was Mrs. Peterson and Mrs. Grant, and they say, oh, go ahead, honey, you can just call me Elaine. It's like, oh, no, I can't. So it took a while because they had been my teachers. But it was also so awesome because they would help me. And of course, I think to them, they were thrilled that I was there and that I had, that they had had an influence on my life. So yeah, I did. I had the opportunity to actually teach and then be a principal at the school that I had been a student in.
So how many students are there in the school district? How many teachers, how many students are we talking about?
At this point, we have approximately 2,400 students. We have 5 schools. We have 2 elementaries, 1 middle school, 1 high school, and 1 alternative ed setting.
So I have only a few more questions to ask you, but before I do, I wanted to ask you, when you were in the classroom and teaching, what grades were you teaching?
I began in kindergarten, so I was a kindergarten teacher. I always say I'm a kindergarten teacher at heart because that's where I began. And then I became a resource teacher. I was a language resource teacher. So at that point, then I worked with students anywhere from kindergarten to the 12th grade. I actually was assigned to work with all of the students or teachers who are working with students who needed language development in English. So then I rotated through all the school sites. So at that point, it was K-12.
So again, as I said, I only have a few more questions, 2 more actually.
Sure.
These are more philosophical, but to what extent do you believe that being Portuguese American has shaped the way that you have moved through your life, both professionally and personally?
Okay. Well, I think as I shared earlier, I think we are experiences and we are who we are. So being Portuguese, I think, has really shaped my character. I think a lot of the characteristics, the morals, ethics, all that I have really have to do with being Portuguese. I don't know if they would be the same if I wasn't raised in a Portuguese home. It might have been, but I'm not sure. So I think all of that, the hard work, the being honest, the being fair, the being empathetic, being kind, understanding others, I think all that came, I think at least in part, from my being Portuguese. And then I think family and the importance of family and people in general, I think, comes from being Portuguese. I think Portuguese have a very strong family commitment and family ties. And matter of fact, I've gone back to the Azores several times. My children have gone back. I want to make sure my children go back because I want that family connection. So I think that's very Portuguese. I think those characteristics of hard work, fairness, all that stuff is, I think, very Portuguese. I think the importance of family is definitely Portuguese. So I'd say those 2 things. And then, culture and that importance of passing on that culture and those celebrations and those wonderful things that make us who we are, I think also has influenced who I am. And I think in part I've stayed in Hilmar because I want to make a difference. I mean, I want to make a difference. I can make a difference, I believe, to students no matter what district I was in. But Hilmar is a very strong Portuguese community. And I think sometimes it's easier to make change from the inside than it is from the outside. And so I think hanging in there, so to speak, I think is why we have done many of the things that we have for children who speak another language, not just Portuguese, but specifically Portuguese. So, and I think being patient and understanding that and having that background of, you know, where we come from and understanding our town and all that. So I think all those things have made a difference. Yeah, absolutely.
So when all is said and done, what does being Portuguese American mean to you?
Okay. I think it means being blessed by two worlds. I think in some ways it's there's a difficulty because you're pulled two ways, and then eventually I think you recognize where you belong. And for me, it was here in the U.S. And then I think there's another transition where you begin to set another foot again in the Azores, and it's that now I can go over there and spend a summer there, or I hope to spend even more time there later on, and feel just as comfortable there as I do here. So I think it's being blessed by two cultures, and two very strong cultures. You know, the culture of the U.S., which has been my home and has shaped me and made me who I am, but also the values and the culture of the Portuguese. So it's who I am. I can't imagine not being a Portuguese American.
Is there anything that we didn't cover during the course of the interview that you'd like to share?
Well, I guess, first of all, I just think it's so awesome that this project is happening, that we're able to chronicle the experiences, I think, of Portuguese Americans. I think that's really important. And for me, of course, the importance is that educational piece. That's been my life. This is, I think, my 37th year in education. So I've dedicated my life to education. And I think specifically to not just helping those that speak another language, but to the growth and development of all. You know, as a teacher, yes, when you're a child, with children, and then later on an administrator with that. So I just feel so totally, I have had such a blessed life. And really, that is in part to the sacrifice that my parents made. I can't imagine leaving a world that you know for a world that you don't know. Thousands of miles, not knowing the language, not knowing what's going to come your way. And why are you doing it? You're doing it for the better life of your children. So I just will be eternally, forever grateful to my parents for giving me the opportunity to live in this wonderful world, in between these two worlds that I live in. So that's it.
Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
This was such